There we go. Okay, so today what I'd like to do is compare Maslow's 4 stages of learning to inner game. And one thing I want to make a disclaimer here is that this is my personal opinion. This isn't the actual position of Tim Gallwey or the Inner Game Corporation, but it's something that I observed learning about organization development and also being a certified inner game trainer, facilitator, and coach. So I'll share my screen here and you could see Maslow's 4 stages of learning. Let me go into screen share.
Yep, there it is. I see it.
Okay. So now I'm a tennis instructor. So why don't we use tennis as an example of how these 4 stages work?
Brilliant.
Stage 1 is called unconscious incompetence. Stage 2 is called conscious incompetence. Stage 3, conscious competence. And stage 4, which is the goal, is unconscious competence. So if we're giving somebody a tennis lesson and they come onto the court, I've seen this happen at parks when I go to the tennis court once in a while. You see somebody who's only seen tennis on TV, never touched a racket before, never hit a ball. And you throw them the ball and they know so little about tennis that they think they're going to be able to do it just like they saw on the television, and they swat at the ball and it goes over the fence. They have absolutely no control. They hit a home run, perhaps even kill a bird on the process. And when that happens, at first they say, well, I have to just take a little more control. You hit them another ball, and the same thing happens second time. That's the first stage, unconscious incompetence. They know so little that they don't even know that they don't know anything about tennis. They thought they could just swing the racket as hard as they could, and somehow it was going to go over the net and into the court. As soon as that happens, and as soon as they hit a couple fly balls, they graduate to stage 2, which is conscious incompetence. They go, oh, I don't know how they do it on TV, how they can swing so hard and still control the ball. I'm going to have to learn this. They're conscious that they're not competent in tennis. So if they want to take it a step further, they'll go to stage 3, which is conscious competence, where now they're going to learn or be taught how to play tennis. And they take a tennis lesson, and you have a tennis instructor there, and they're going through all the different steps of what's involved in a proper swing, where you take the racket back as the ball crosses the net. If it's a forehand, you drop your racket, you grip it like this, you step in, you follow through. Your follow through should end up right here. It's about 7 things to remember. And meanwhile, a ball's coming at you. And so it's very conscious, okay? It's very, you have to really be thinking about what you're doing when the ball comes at you. And actually at this stage, it's not very fun because you're having to think about it so much. You're really not enjoying tennis. You're just trying to do it right. That's stage 3. But if you are persevere enough and stay with it, and you're willing to go through stage 3 of just this rote being taught how to play tennis, eventually it becomes automatic. And that's your goal. You are now graduated to stage 4, where you can play tennis without having to think about all the things you're doing, and that's unconscious competence. So those are the 4 stages of learning, and you could think about it like driving a car. It's the same process. Now, here's the difference with Tim Gallwey. He had a tremendous discovery when he came out with the inner game. He said that you could streamline the process by changing the operating word. Now, in the process I described with you, the operating word is competence. Okay, this is what the person is looking for, is to be able to gain competence. And you're gaining competence by being taught and trying to learn it. Tim said, let's change the operating word from competence to conscious. So instead of focusing on competence, which is outer, which is being taught, because the teacher is on the outside giving instructions and the learner is listening to the teacher, so from the learner's standpoint, it's outer. Let's make it inner and focus on the learner's conscious awareness, or actually unconscious. What he's essentially saying is, if you keep the learner unconscious, which in Maslow's term, unconscious meaning just not knowing enough to be able to even try, okay, not being instructed, but instead just observing what really is happening instead of what you would like to be happening, instead of what should be happening, instead of what you're trying to make happen, you keep the learner unconscious. And if you do this, you will bypass stages 2 and 3, and you go directly from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence, which is the goal. Now, that sounds like a mouthful. This is very theoretical so far. But let me give you an example that's shown on another video that we have posted in the Agile group, which is the Reason Report video that has a demo of Tim instructing a beginner, Molly, to play tennis. And you see this process actually demonstrated, because Molly's a beginner. She's never played tennis, actually never did anything athletic before, and didn't know the first thing that would be involved with playing tennis. And Tim keeps it that way through the entire lesson. Instead of telling Molly, oh, you're supposed to get the ball over the net and into the court, and I'll teach you how to do that, Tim keeps Molly unconscious. Tim says to Molly, all I want you to do is say bounce when the ball bounces on the court. And if it happens to strike the racket, say hit. And you want to be as simultaneous as possible. Molly, can you do that? Bounce when it bounces and say hit when it hits? Give it a try. And what he's doing is just building Molly's awareness of what's taking place, so all the learning can happen, because being aware of bounce hit makes her aware of the racket in relation to the ball, which she needs to do in order for her body to learn. And you could see in the video, after about 12 tries, Molly's playing tennis, and she's not even a natural athlete, because Tim, it's very remarkable, Tim bypassed stages 2 and 3 in this process of learning, going directly from unconscious competence, unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. Keep the student unconscious in other words, not trying, not having to think about what they're being taught. And you make learning much more agile. So how does that sit with you, Alistair?
No, absolutely. I think the beauty of this process is that when you observe it, you almost can't believe it. Or when we observe Molly's the example with Molly and others that we've seen, where Tim is doing this, you almost can't believe it, because all of our lives we've been taught to learn things, right? We've been shown how to do things in a given way, and I think the whole idea that the human brain and the human body, without interference, can learn at a huge rate, so much faster, is so powerful. And figuring out and doing what, figuring out how to do what Tim has figured out how to do, which is to keep the student, the learner, in a state where they're not interfering with their own learning.
Yeah.
is just genius. And I think and what you described there with the stages, the 4 stages that we've all experienced, we all know we go through those, and we all know the frustration that we get to and the almost giving up point that we get to whilst we're in 2 and 3, and it can take just years to get to that point.
Yeah, and it's not fun.
And it's not, and it's never fun.
That's the thing, is
I mean,
that
and yet
the whole time
in the game. Yes, sorry,
no,
Jeff.
the whole time Molly was having fun, and she's never done anything really athletic before. So for her to just be able to discover how much fun doing sports is was made a big difference, because after all, it's great that we can do something we need to do and at the same time enjoy it.
Yes.
It's a big part of inner game too. Is enjoyment is an inherent part of performance.
No, it's genius, and certainly with sport, which is something which is sort of physical and mental, you can see that direct relationship. I'm wondering, is there a nice simple explanation, as you described there with this process, where we can look at somebody who is learning a process, or learning how to do work, where we can find a similar continuum, if you will. What is the equivalent of bounce hit? If I'm learning how to sell, or say I'm learning how to, I can see it with music. I can see how the equivalent of bounce hit can be used with when I'm learning the saxophone, for example. I'm just wondering if you can help us to start to become aware of what that would look like in the space, if you will, of being in business, of working.
Well, the first step is to realize that you're the learner, not the teacher, in any process. You want to be constantly learning. And when you put yourself in a learning mode, you can't lose, because no matter ever the outcome of any situation, you could learn from that outcome. And if your priority is to learn as much as possible, then you're going to avoid the negative judgment that sabotages your awareness. Because what happens is, like going back to Molly with the tennis, if she was thinking about the 7 things, drop the racket, step in, make sure it's back when the ball crosses the net, she would have been distracted thinking about all those things and not paying attention to the ball. She wouldn't be aware of where the ball was in relation to the racket, which is the most essential thing. So it's the same thing in any endeavor where we don't want our self-doubts and judgments to be able to distract us from what we happen to be doing in the moment. Once we're aware of what we're doing in the moment, we accelerate the learning, the awareness that we need. And so to answer your question, you really want to make your priority your learning, and also you could say your evolution or your growth as an individual.
Sure. No, that makes absolute sense. And if I have control over my environment and my work environment in particular, and I know that I've got my own timelines, my own deadlines, my own, I can take the time I need to do the learning. How do I marry that then? Or do we know yet how we marry that with the fact that maybe I have, a boss or a stakeholder who is, keen to see the performance results, keen to see that I deliver, and I'm trying to be in the best learning enjoyment mode I can be, but I've got this, interference, I guess. And so what do is there something that we can do to help us sort of navigate the fact that we will get there faster? We know we'll get there faster if we're enjoying and we're learning, but we've got somebody who said, what are you doing learning? You're supposed to already know this. That's why I hired you. Is there do we yet know how to square that circle?
Well, there's quite a few things that were packed in there. Let me just back up to something else you said, which is controlling your environment. We really don't have control of our outer environment as far as the outcomes that happen. We work with, whatever circumstances we have, and we work towards the best outcome, but I wouldn't say necessarily that we control it. As a matter of fact, it's a formula for burnout, trying to control something that you don't have control over.
Sure.
It's almost better to realize that you don't have control over it.
Right.
But the point is, what do you have control over? You have control over what you learn from any situation. So now you've just gotten rid of your source of burnout because you're only trying to control what's controllable. Very important. Okay. The next thing is having to do with a boss that has a lot of expectations of you. And once again, I would turn the conversation from outer to inner. So as far as things you can control, you are your first boss. Okay. As Tim Gallwey would say, you are the CEO of the corporation of you, the Alistair Corrie Corporation. And you have control over who you sell your shares of your corporation to. You could, sometimes you need to buy back some shares if you've given too many away, you realize, but you have control over the learning, the projects, and you might not be able to be in control of what a boss thinks of you, but you can be in control of your own corporation, and that's what comes first. So I would just stick to the learning. And you could also learn about this boss. What is it about them that maybe really seems to be affecting you when you're achieving your objective, which is to learn and grow as much as possible in this particular situation based on trying to get to the outcome.
Mm.
And also perhaps knowing and pointing out to this boss what they might also need to be aware of in order to realize that
Mm.
they don't want to interfere with the outcome. And
Mm.
just like all of us, perhaps they are.
Sure.
And, maybe putting them in touch with a few things that are taking place that they might not be aware of.
Sure.
In terms of the importance of your learning
Mm.
and how that's making a difference.
Mm.
So there's a lot of options. One thing Tim says is that a human being is a project who works on projects.
Mm.
So in other words, we're working on projects, sure, but at the same time, we're a project. We're
Right.
evolving in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the inner game.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be our priority, because
Sure.
at the end of the day, we're human beings who learn and grow. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how we are able to get to the point where we can achieve outcomes.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really helpful. And I'm wondering, is there a way that we can learn, obviously, as well as learning on the job, how to be in this state that you're describing? I'm wondering if there are some games or activities or sort of
Mhm,
experiences that we can help people, we can put ourselves through and
mhm,
maybe help others go through,
mhm,
whereby they can prove to themselves
mhm,
that by adopting the stance that you describe
mhm,
and that describes, by adopting that stance, you actually will get to the outcome faster, because we know with Molly and we know with with all the sports examples, we also know from your book with the sales examples that
mhm,
by taking this stance, you get there faster and better.
mhm,
We can clearly see that.
mhm,
Um, I suppose it would be interesting to see a real live example with a project with that sort
mhm,
of model, where we can do that. And so maybe a set up a
mhm.
scenario based game that helps us see that process, maybe with the interference coming in on purpose. We can
Oh,
create
yeah.
interference and stress quite easily,
Yeah.
so that we prove to the individuals that that's the best place for them to be in spite of the
Mhm,
noise. But then
yeah.
also to use that to show the stakeholders and the bosses that, as you rightly said, you want the best outcome.
Mhm,
What you're doing is interfering, but and we can show you what that interference is doing and what it looks like.
mhm.
So this is how we do. I'm wondering, does anything like that already exist, Jeff, or is that something that you can see, something that we could create, maybe?
Well, it exists for quite a few different activities,
Hmm.
but more importantly, there's a process that
Mm.
exists
Right.
for creating that scenario of optimal learning, and it's called critical variables. The inner game calls them critical variables. And what they are basically is a point of focus or observation,
Mm.
awareness that somebody needs in order to uh, maximize their learning and therefore achieve the best performance.
Right. Yep.
So it would be a matter of creating the critical variables, which are talked about quite a bit in Tim Gallwey's book, The Inner Game of Work.
Mm.
He
Yes.
talks about critical variables, and he talks about discovering various critical variables. And
Mm.
we have many examples,
Mm.
but um, each person, there's inner game, which we're talking about.
Mm.
And then in the world, there's 7 billion inner games with a small I and a small g. In other words, each individual has their own personal
Yeah.
inner game, small I, small g.
Mm. Mm.
And so we're each going to have our own unique personal set of critical variables for
Hmm.
us to focus on in order for us to grow as
Yeah.
people and as project managers.
Mm, mm,
And so understanding the process of discovering the critical variables that you need to focus on in order to achieve your objective
mm.
is very important.
Sure.
Is part of the process, and I think that's what you're talking about.
Mm,
And it's going to be slightly different for everybody, but it's an important process for us all to learn. In the case of learning tennis,
mm,
the critical variable was where the ball was in relation to the racket. That's what Molly had to be in touch
mm.
with.
Yeah.
And as a result, Tim made a game, like you're saying, which is
Mm,
called bounce hit.
mm.
But Tim could have said any number of games. He
Yeah.
could have asked Molly to watch the seams of the ball. He
Mm,
could have asked Molly to notice the shape of her swing.
yeah.
Uh, Many different games you could play that would get
Sure.
Molly in touch with the
Ah,
critical variable of where the ball is
yeah.
in relation to the racket.
And I suppose I know that really helps you. That reminds me of my own personal experience as a teenager with as a late teenager with the inner game myself when I first read Tim's first book. And I think and what I found was I was playing tennis one week and not succeeding, not winning in this
Mm-hmm.
case. I read the book. That weekend, I went to the tennis court and practiced. It was my serve in particular that I needed to work on. I went on my own, so away from any stress, practiced. And then the very next week, when I was playing again, not competitively in any sort of financial sense, but just playing for fun, playing to win, I was then able to completely change my game. So I was able to
Mm-hmm.
take myself out of the stressful environment,
Mm-hmm.
learn and practice,
Mm-hmm.
and realize for myself that this would work, and then I could figure out how to apply that back
Mm-hmm.
in the thing in the on the tennis court when facing an opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I'm wondering
Well,
whether
let me just stop you though, because you said a lot in there, and I just want to point out the inner game relevant points of what you said so far, and then
sure.
you can go on. But what happened was you read the book and then practiced a few things and then went on the tennis court. And interestingly, you said, I changed my game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What happens when you're trying to win, you don't want to jeopardize your competence by changing the way you hit the ball because
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be unfamiliar at first. It's kind of a gamble. And here you are
Mm-hmm.
playing tennis. If you want to win, you want to minimize gambling.
Yes.
And so you're going to keep hitting the ball the way you've been hitting the ball,
Yes.
which actually might not be optimal for you,
Correct.
but you're too scared to experiment with something new because you
Mm.
want to win. You want to take any chances. You don't trust that something unfamiliar actually might be better.
Mm.
But then what you said is you read the book and then you realized that it's okay to change your game.
Mm. Mm.
That's
Mm.
important.
Yes.
That's so then you changed to something that felt better and
Mm.
actually got a better result. So there's that element of self-trust
Mm.
and awareness and letting go that we talk about in inner game that's responsible for change that we need in order to continue to improve. Now
And
you can go on.
no, thank you. And I think what you
Yeah.
and just finishing that off, I think what you said there is that the letting go part was the key,
Mm-hmm.
because I became curious, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose from I was intellectually curious about whether what I was doing without an opponent could actually work with an opponent. So I was more interested in the learning, coming
Mm-hmm.
back to what we started with, where I was more interested in the
Mm-hmm.
learning than I was in the winning.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I ended up winning
You ended up winning without trying.
without trying.
That's
Exactly.
the important thing.
And
Trying to win interferes with winning.
exactly.
Okay. And in inner game, you have to eliminate trying.
Yes.
So as it comes, trying is one of the most insidious sources of interference to peak performance.
Mm.
If we try to sleep, are we sleeping? right?
Exactly.
It's
Yeah,
actually trying to get to sleep is what's going to keep you awake.
exactly.
Well, it's the same thing in
With it.
if I'm trying to like you, do I
Mm,
like you?
mm,
You know, if
exactly.
I'm trying to have fun, am I
Mm,
having fun? You know,
exactly.
trying actually is sabotaging
Yeah,
the outcome of what
yeah.
we want.
Mm. So, and no, brilliant. So I suppose then coming back to my project, so I'm now the person on a project trying to deliver, trying
Hmm.
again, as you can see. But I've taken a moment, I've gone away, I've spent the weekend figuring out how my learning works, how my process
Hmm.
is.
Hmm.
And then if I come back to work on a Monday morning
Hmm.
and I am now curious about this new approach,
Hmm.
this observation, this non-judgmental observation approach.
Hmm.
What will be really exciting to do is for people to experience just how fast they go from not feeling successful and trying hard and failing
Hmm.
and so on to feeling successful. So for me, it was a case of a weekend. It was literally probably less than a couple of hours worth of practice that
Hmm.
got me from one state to the next.
Hmm.
Um, and I suppose for the world of work, we would see the same thing
Absolutely.
if people would give themselves the chance to do that.
Yes,
Does that make
absolutely. Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
amazing?
Be curious, to be willing to let go, to uh, to know what you really want, to
Mm,
know what outcome you're really looking for.
mm,
Because outcomes don't only involve the performance itself, it also involves the enjoyment you have in the process,
yeah.
and it also involves how much you've learned in the process.
Mm, amazing. Wow. Mind blowing in a really exciting and positive way.
Yes, yes, yeah. It's
No, brilliant.
yeah. I mean, Tim Gallwey really discovered something that fundamentally changed the coaching profession back
Mm,
when the inner game came out,
yeah.
and something that, being agile practitioners uh, definitely uh, facilitate the process of
Mm,
learning and
yeah.
better outcomes.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. That has been really, really instructional and inspirational, and a lot to rewatch and unpack and contemplate and practice.
Great. All right. Glad I could help. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Let's see.